They dressed Ayomide like a bride, but treated her like a burden being thrown away. In the middle of the courtyard, laughter rippled through the crowd as she was pushed forward, her trembling hands forced into those of a blind man she had never chosen. Whispers cut deeper than knives. A widow with debts. At least this one can't see her shame. The man said nothing. His face remained calm, too calm. Then, as the mockery grew louder, he tilted his head slightly, as if he could see everything they were hiding. And for a brief, unsettling moment, Ayomide felt it. Something wasn't right. Before we go on, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I'd love to know who's here with me. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Ayomide Adebayo had once believed that marriage would be her escape. Not from poverty, she had grown up in it and understood its quiet cruelty, but from loneliness. From the endless struggle of being unseen, unheard, and unchosen, in a world that moved too quickly for girls like her. When she married Kunle Adebayo, she thought she had finally found a place where her presence mattered. She was wrong. Kunle had been kind in the beginning, soft-spoken, ambitious, always promising that one day things would change. But promises do not pay debts, and hope does not silence hunger. Within 2 years, their small rented home had become a place of constant tension. Money was always short. Arguments became frequent. And the pressure from Kunle's family, especially his mother, Mama Ayomide, never stopped. You brought nothing into this house, Mama Ayomide would say, her voice sharp with disdain, not even blessings. Ayomide endured it all quietly. She woke before dawn, cooked, cleaned, fetched water, and still tried to support Kunle's failing business. She believed that if she just tried harder, loved harder, things would improve. But life had other plans. The accident came without warning. One rainy evening, Kunle never returned home. A call came instead. By the time Ayomide reached the hospital, her world had already collapsed. Kunle was gone. Just like that. No goodbye. No final words. Only silence. And silence, Ayomide would soon learn, can be louder than any scream. The days that followed were a blur of grief and judgment. At the funeral, people cried, but not all tears were for Kunle. Some eyes turned toward Ayomide with quiet suspicion. She brought misfortune, one woman whispered behind her hand. I heard things were already bad before he died. Another added. Mama Ayomide said nothing at first. She wept loudly, beating her chest in front of the crowd, mourning her son in a way that commanded attention. But when the visitors left, everything changed. The house grew colder. The sympathy disappeared. And Ayomide's place in that home shifted overnight from wife to burden. You will not sit here and eat food my son worked for, Mama, Ayomide said, just days after the burial, her tone stripped of all pretense. Ayomide stood in the corner of the small living room, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of her wrapper. I can work, she said softly. I can find something. You should have done that before he died, Mama, Ayomide snapped. Tosin, Kunle's younger brother, leaned against the wall, watching with quiet amusement. She's right, he said. All you did was stay in the house. Now see what's happened. Ayomide swallowed the pain rising in her throat. I did everything I could, she whispered. But her words meant nothing here. They had already decided who she was. From that day on, Ayomide was no longer treated as family. She became labor. She cleaned the entire compound alone. She cooked but ate last if there was anything left. She washed clothes until her hands grew rough and cracked. And still, it was never enough. Neighbors noticed. They always notice. But noticing is not the same as helping. At the local market, whispers followed her like shadows. That's Kunle's widow, the one who couldn't even keep her husband alive. Now she's stuck there, serving them like a maid. Ayomide kept her head down. Because sometimes dignity is the only thing a person has left, and even that must be protected in silence. Weeks turned into months. Hunger became familiar. Exhaustion settled deep into her bones. And still she endured. Not because she had strength, but because she had nowhere else to go. Her own family was gone. No parents, no siblings, no place to return to. The Adebayo house, no matter how cruel, was the only roof over her head. And Mama Ayomide knew it. She used it. One afternoon, under the harsh Lagos sun, Ayomide returned from fetching water to find Mama Ayomide sitting outside, speaking in low tones with a distant relative. They stopped talking when she approached. That alone was enough to send a quiet unease through her chest. "Come here, Mama," Ayomide said without looking at her. Ayomide stepped forward slowly. The older woman studied her for a long moment, as if measuring something. Then she sighed, a heavy, deliberate sound. "I have been thinking," she began. Ayomide's heart tightened. "I cannot continue feeding you, Mama," Ayomide continued. "This house is already struggling." Ayomide lowered her gaze. "I understand," she said quietly, but she didn't. "Not fully. Not yet." "There is a way," Mama Ayomide added. Those words, calm, almost gentle, felt more dangerous than any insult. Ayomide looked up. "A way?" she asked. Tosin smirked from behind. "Yes, Mama," Ayomide said. "A solution." The silence that followed stretched just a little too long. "Then you will marry again." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ayomide blinked. What? You heard me, Mama," Ayomide said coldly. "A man has agreed to take you." Ayomide's breath caught. So soon, she whispered. "After Kunle. Do not pretend you are still his wife, Mama," Ayomide snapped. "You are a liability now." The relative nodded in agreement. "It is a good offer," she added. "Not many would take a widow with nothing." Ayomide felt her chest tighten. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice barely audible. For the first time, Mama Ayomide smiled. But it was not a kind smile. "He is blind." The world seemed to tilt. Ayomide stared at her, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Blind," she repeated. "Yes," Tosin said casually. "He cannot see, so he will not complain." A small laugh escaped him. The others joined in softly, as if this were reasonable. As if this were mercy. Ayomide's fingers trembled. "You want me to marry a man I do not know, because he cannot see me." "No, Mama," Ayomide corrected sharply. "Because he is willing to take you." The distinction cut deeper than anything else. I don't want this," Ayomide said, her voice breaking for the first time. "You do not have a choice." The words came without hesitation. Without apology, silence fell. Heavy. Final. Ayomide looked from one face to another. No one defended her. No one questioned it. In that moment, she understood something she had tried to deny for months. She was no longer a person in this house. She was a problem, and they had found a way to remove her. "When?" she asked weakly. "Soon," Mama Ayomide replied. "Very soon." Ayomide nodded slowly. Not because she agreed, but because resistance in that moment felt like shouting into an empty room. No one would hear her. No one ever had. That night, as she lay on the thin mat in the corner of the house, sleep did not come. She stared into the darkness, her mind racing. A blind man, a forced marriage, a future decided without her voice. Tears slipped silently into her hair. But she made no sound, because even grief in that house had to be quiet. Outside, the night carried on as usual. Distant laughter, passing footsteps, life moving forward, unaffected, unaware. But inside Ayomide's chest, something fragile had begun to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change everything. And somewhere far beyond what she could imagine, a man who could not see was already watching everything. The days after Mama Ayolade's announcement did not feel real to Ayomide. They moved too quickly, as if someone else had taken control of her life and pressed forward without waiting for her to catch up. Conversations happened around. Her decisions were made over her head, and every time she tried to speak, her voice seemed to disappear before it could reach anyone. The house was suddenly busy. Relatives who had barely visited since Kunle's death began appearing again, sitting in corners, whispering in low tones, casting quick glances in her direction as if she were an object being negotiated. Ayomide understood. This was no longer about her life. It was about a transaction. She should be grateful, one aunt muttered one afternoon while peeling cassava in the courtyard. "Who else would take her? She is lucky the man cannot see," another replied. "Otherwise, he would refuse immediately." A quiet laugh followed. Ayomide stood by the doorway, her hands still damp from washing clothes, listening without moving. Each word settled into her chest like weight. Grateful. Lucky. Words that sounded kind but carried no kindness at all. Later that evening, she gathered what little courage she had left and approached Mama Ayomide. The older woman sat on a wooden chair, fanning herself slowly, her expression unreadable. Mama, Ayomide began softly. Mama Iyalade did not look up. Yes, Ayomide hesitated. I want to understand, she said carefully. This man, Sun Balogun, who is he? Mama Iyalade's hand paused mid-air, then resumed fanning. He is a man who has agreed to marry you, she replied flatly. That is not what I mean, Ayomide said, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain calm. Where does he live? What does he do? Who is his family? This time Mama Iyalade looked at her, slowly, as if the questions themselves were offensive. You ask too many questions for someone in your position, she said. Ayomide lowered her gaze but did not step back. I am the one who will marry him, she whispered. I should at least know. You should be thankful, Mama, Iyalade cut in sharply. That is what you should be. Silence followed. Then, more quietly, but no less firmly, he is blind. That is all that matters. That night, Ayomide could not sleep again. Sun Balogun, the name echoed in her mind. She tried to imagine him. An older man, perhaps. Or someone broken by life. Someone who needed a wife not for love, but for convenience. Was he cruel? Was he kind? Would he treat her like Mama Iyalade did? Or worse, the not knowing frightened her more than anything else. The next morning, preparations began in earnest. Clothes were brought out. Not new ones, nothing so generous, but slightly better than what she had been wearing. A faded wrapper was replaced with one that still held some color. A blouse without tears was found and handed to her. Wear this, Tosin said, tossing it toward her carelessly. You should at least look presentable. Ayomide caught it silently. She wanted to ask why. Why now? Why the sudden concern for how she looked? But she already knew the answer, because now she was being presented. By midday, the house was filled again. This time, not just relatives, but strangers. Men with serious expressions. Women who observed everything without smiling. Ayomide stood inside her heart, beating fast as she listened to voices outside. They are here, someone said. A chill ran through her. They. Mama Iyalade called her out. Come. Ayomide stepped into the courtyard slowly. The sunlight felt too bright, too harsh. It made everything feel exposed. There were 3 people seated across from Mama Iyalade. 2 men, 1 older woman. They turned to look at her as she approached. Their eyes were not cruel, but they were not warm either. They were assessing. This is her Mama, Iyalade said. Ayomide felt the words more than she heard them, as if she were being introduced as something, not someone. The older woman nodded slightly. She looks healthy, she said. One of the men added, and quiet. Good, the other murmured. Ayomide stood still. She did not know where to place her hands, or her eyes, or her breath. Come closer, the older woman said. Ayomide obeyed. Turn. She turned. Stand straight. She did. The inspection continued for several long, uncomfortable seconds. Then it will do, the woman said. That was all. No questions. No interest in who Ayomide was. Only confirmation that she was acceptable. Ayomide's chest tightened. Where is the man, she asked before she could stop herself. The courtyard fell quiet. Mama Iyalade shot her a sharp look, but the older woman answered, He does not need to be here. Ayomide frowned slightly. I thought he has already agreed, the woman said. That is enough. Something inside Ayomide shifted then. A quiet realization. She was not entering a marriage. She was being placed into one. Without voice, without choice, without even being seen by the man she was meant to spend her life with. After the visitors left, the atmosphere in the house changed again. Lighter. Relieved. As if a burden had already been lifted. Mama Iyalade seemed almost pleased. It is settled, she said. Ayomide's heart dropped. So soon, she whispered. In 3 days. 3 days. That was all. 3 days to say goodbye to a life she had never chosen. 3 days to prepare for another one she did not understand. 3 days to become a wife again without ever being asked if she wanted to be one. That evening, Ayomide sat alone behind the house near the small patch of dry ground where weeds struggled to grow. The sun was setting, soft, golden, almost beautiful, but she felt none of it. I tried, she whispered to no one, to Kunle, to herself, to whatever part of her still hoped life could be different. I really tried. Tears filled her eyes, but this time she did not wipe them away. Footsteps approached. She quickly straightened. It was Tosin. He stood a few feet away, watching her. "You should not cry," he said casually. "You are getting a second chance." Ayomide looked at him. A second chance at what? He shrugged. At being useful. The words landed heavily. But something unexpected followed. Not pain, not tears, but a quiet stillness. Ayomide turned her gaze back to the horizon. The sun had almost disappeared now. Only a faint glow remained. "Do you even know him?" she asked after a moment. Tosin laughed lightly. "No." "Then how can you be so sure this is good?" He tilted his head. "Because it is good for us." There it was. Simple, honest, cruel. Ayomide nodded slowly. Not because she agreed, but because she finally understood. This had never been about her future, or her happiness, or her safety. It was about removing her. That night she packed what little she owned. A small cloth bundle, 2 wrappers, 1 blouse, nothing more. As she folded the last piece of fabric, her hands paused. She looked around the small corner where she had been sleeping. The space that had held her pain, her silence, her survival, and for the first time, she wondered if leaving this place, even like this, might not be the worst thing that could happen. But then the thought returned. Sharp, unavoidable. A blind man, a stranger, a life unknown. Ayomide closed her eyes, took a slow breath. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, her future was already waiting, and she had no way of knowing that the man she feared most was the only one who would ever truly see her. The morning of the wedding arrived too quietly. No music woke the house. No laughter echoed through the compound. There were no joyful preparations, no excited chatter, no sense of celebration. Only movement, quick, purposeful, and cold. Ayomide woke before anyone called her. She had barely slept. Her body felt heavy, as though the weight of the past 3 days had settled into her bones. For a moment she remained still on her mat, staring at the ceiling, hoping just for a second that everything had been a misunderstanding. But the voices outside reminded her. Today was real. "Get up," Tosin's voice came from the doorway. "They will be here soon." Ayomide sat up slowly. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers intertwined, trembling just enough for her to notice. She did not ask who they were. She already knew. The clothes were laid out for her. A white dress, not new but carefully chosen. It had been worn before, perhaps by someone else, but it had been washed and pressed. It carried the faint scent of starch, and something older, something borrowed. A veil was placed beside it. Simple, thin, almost transparent. Ayomide stared at it for a long moment. White, a color meant to symbolize purity, new beginnings, hope, none of which she felt. "Wear it, Mama," Ayomide said from behind her. Ayomide did not turn. "Yes, Mama." Her voice came out softer than she expected. Dressing felt like stepping into a role she did not understand. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if she were watching herself from a distance. When she finished, she stood in front of the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The reflection looking back at her was unfamiliar. A bride, but not a joyful one. Her eyes carried something else. Resignation. "Do not look like that, Mama," Ayomide said, stepping beside her. "At least pretend you are grateful." Ayomide said nothing. There was nothing left to say. By mid-morning, the courtyard was filled. Chairs had been arranged. A table stood at the center. A few neighbors had gathered, drawn not by celebration but by curiosity. Weddings, even small ones, always attracted attention. But this one felt different. The air carried something heavier than joy. "They say the groom is already on his way," someone whispered. "I heard he is completely blind," another replied. "How will he even know what kind of wife he is getting?" A soft laugh followed. Ayomide heard every word. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her gaze fixed on the ground. If she looked up, she would see their faces, and she wasn't sure she could bear it. Then a car pulled up outside. Not loud, not flashy, just present. The murmurs shifted. "He's here." Ayomide's heart began to race. Faster, louder, until it felt like it might break through her chest. Footsteps approached, measured, unhurried. She lifted her gaze slightly, just enough to see. He was taller than she expected. Dressed simply but neatly. A clean shirt, dark trousers, Nothing extravagant. Nothing that suggested wealth or importance. But there was something about the way he moved, careful but not uncertain, guided but not helpless. A man walked beside him, speaking quietly, offering direction. But the blind man, Sunbalogun, did not cling to him. He walked with his own rhythm, his own awareness. Ayomide's breath caught. This was him, the man she had been given to. Sun stopped a few steps away. His face turned slightly, as if listening, as if sensing the space around him. Then he spoke. "Good morning." His voice was calm, steady, unexpectedly warm. No one answered immediately. The crowd seemed unsure how to respond. Finally, Mama Ayomide stepped forward. "You are welcome," she said. Formalities followed. Words exchanged, brief, transactional, the kind that carry obligation, not emotion. Ayomide stood still, waiting, for something, anything. But nothing came. "Bring the bride," someone said. Her legs felt heavy as she stepped forward, each step slower than the last, until she stood beside him, close enough to feel his presence, close enough to hear his breathing. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then the whispers returned, soft but sharp. "Look at her. She's shaking. Even he deserves better. At least he cannot see her fear." Ayomide closed her eyes briefly, just for a second. But it was enough. Enough to steady herself. Enough to remind herself that this moment would pass. "Do you agree to this union?" the officiating elder asked. The question was directed at Sun first. "Yes," he replied. Without hesitation, the word echoed. Simple. Certain. The morning of the wedding did not arrive with celebration. It came with a quiet that felt unnatural, heavy, deliberate, and suffocating. The kind of silence that settles over a place where something is about to be taken, not given. Even the usual sounds of the compound, the clatter of pots, the chatter of neighbors, the distant calls from the street seemed muted, as though the world itself had stepped back to watch what was about to unfold. Ayomide had not slept. She lay awake through the night, staring into the darkness, her thoughts circling the same unbearable truth. By the time the sun rose, her life would no longer belong to her. When dawn finally came, it did not feel like a new beginning. It felt like an ending. She rose slowly from her mat, her body stiff, her chest tight with a quiet, lingering dread. For a moment she simply stood there, her fingers resting against the wall, grounding herself in something solid, something real. But even that felt temporary, because everything else was already slipping away. The dress had been laid out for her. White, carefully folded, placed on the edge of the bed as though it carried meaning, as though it represented hope. But Ayomide understood what it truly was. Not a symbol of love, not a celebration, but a uniform, something she was expected to wear while being handed over. "Wear it, Mama," Ayomide said from the doorway, her voice flat, practical, untouched by emotion. There was no softness in her tone, no hesitation, only expectation. Ayomide nodded without speaking. She picked up the dress with slow, deliberate movements, her fingers brushing over the fabric. It was not new, but it had been prepared, washed, pressed, made presentable, prepared for the role she was about to play. Dressing felt distant, like she was watching someone else move. Each motion, lifting the fabric, tying the wrapper, adjusting the veil, happened without thought. Her reflection in the cracked mirror did not feel like her own. The woman staring back wore the face of a bride, but her eyes carried none of the softness, none of the quiet joy that usually lived there. Only stillness, only surrender. "Stand properly, Mama," Ayomide said, stepping closer to inspect her. "At least look like someone worth taking." The words landed, but Ayomide did not react. There was nothing left inside her that could respond. By mid-morning, the courtyard had been arranged. Plastic chairs lined the edges. A small table stood at the center. A few bottles of soft drinks had been placed on top, more for appearance than hospitality. People began to gather. Not many, but enough. Neighbors who had heard. Relatives who wanted to witness. Faces filled with curiosity rather than celebration. They did not come to bless the union. They came to observe it. Ayomide stood at the far end of the courtyard, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her gaze lowered. She could feel their eyes on her, moving over her like quiet judgment. She looks thinner. Of course she does. That house drained her. At least now she won't be their problem anymore. The whispers floated through the air, soft but sharp, cutting through the silence with quiet cruelty. Then came the sound. A car. Not loud, not extravagant. Just enough to shift the atmosphere. He's here. The words moved through the crowd like a ripple. People straightened, heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence. Ayomide felt her heartbeat quicken, each pulse louder than the last. This was it. The car door opened. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried. Ayomide lifted her gaze. Slowly, carefully. He was not what she expected. Not fragile, not broken, not the image of helplessness that had been painted for her. Oluwaseun Balogun walked with a quiet steadiness, guided slightly by the man beside him, but not dependent on him. His posture was straight, his movements controlled. There was a calmness about him that did not match the story she had been told. His eyes, though unfocused, did not seem empty. They seemed distant, as though they were looking beyond what others could see. The courtyard fell into a strange silence as he approached. Not respectful, not welcoming, but uncertain. "Good morning," he said. His voice carried clearly, calm, grounded, unshaken. It was not the voice of a man being pitied. Mama Ayomide stepped forward, her expression carefully arranged. "You are welcome," she replied. Formalities followed. Short exchanges, polite words. But beneath them something unspoken lingered, a tension no one could quite explain. Then came the moment. "Bring the bride." Ayomide felt the words before she moved. Her feet carried her forward step by step until she stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence, close enough to hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. She did not look at him immediately. She could not. The whispers returned, sharper now, more confident. "She's trembling. Even a blind man deserves peace. At least he cannot see what he's getting." Ayomide closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, but to hold herself together. When she opened them again, she turned slightly toward him, just enough to see his face. He was calm, not indifferent, not detached, but aware, in a way that unsettled her. "Do you agree to this union?" the elder asked. Soon answered first. Yes. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. Then the question came to her. "And you?" The world seemed to narrow. The voices faded. The heat of the sun disappeared. There was only the question, and the weight behind it. Did she agree, or was she simply expected to say that she did? A hand pressed lightly against her back. Mama Ayomide. A silent command. Ayomide swallowed. Her voice when it came was fragile but clear enough to be heard. Yes, the word did not belong to her. But it was spoken anyway. The ceremony moved quickly after that. Too quickly. As if no one wanted to linger in the discomfort of what they were witnessing. The ring was placed in Sun's hand. He reached for her. His fingers brushed against hers. Warm, steady, intentional. For a brief moment he paused, as though sensing something, as though noticing her trembling. Then gently he slid the ring onto her finger. When it was her turn, her hands shook, but she completed the act. Because stopping now would change nothing. "It is done," the elder declared. A few claps followed, hollow, unconvincing. People began to disperse almost immediately. Their curiosity satisfied, their judgment already formed. Ayomide remained where she stood, still, unmoving, as if her body had not yet caught up with what had just happened. Then his voice came again, soft, only for her. "Are you afraid?" The question caught her off guard. She turned toward him, studied his face. There was no mockery in his expression, no pity, only quiet understanding. Ayomide hesitated. Then for the first time that day, she answered honestly. "Yes." Sun nodded slightly. "I know," he said. "Just that. Nothing more." But somehow, it felt like the first real thing anyone had said to her all day. The car was ready. Ayomide took one last look at the courtyard, at the house, at the place that had held her pain, her silence, her survival. No one called her back. No one stopped her. She was already gone to them. She turned forward and stepped into the vehicle. As it began to move, she sat beside him in silence. The distance between them small but filled with everything she did not understand. Then Sun tilted his head slightly, as if listening, as if observing something beyond sight. And in that quiet moment, Ayomide felt it again. That strange, unsettling awareness. The man beside her, the one the world had dismissed, was not as blind as they believed. Not at all. And somewhere beneath the fear still gripping her heart, a different question began to form. Not about the life she had lost, but about the truth she had just stepped into. A truth no one else seemed ready to see. The journey to Oluwaseun Balogun's home was quieter than Ayomide expected. Not tense, not awkward in the way strangers usually are when forced into closeness, but quiet in a deeper, more unsettling sense, like two lives moving side by side without yet knowing how or if they would ever truly meet. Ayomide sat by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing streets of Lagos. The city moved as it always did, crowded, restless, alive with noise and motion. Hawkers called out to passing cars, buses rattled over uneven roads, and people navigated the chaos with practiced ease. Life, she realized, did not pause for anyone's pain, not even hers. Beside her soon sat still, too still. Not rigid, not uncomfortable, just composed. As though the movement of the car, the sounds of the city, the shifting of people around him were all part of something he already understood. He did not ask her questions. He did not try to fill the silence, and strangely that made it easier for her to breathe. After some time, he spoke. "You are from this part of the city?" he asked gently. The question surprised her. Not because of what he asked, but how. There was no assumption in his voice, no attempt to lead her answer. Just curiosity. Ayomide hesitated, then nodded before realizing he could not see it. "Yes," she said softly. "I grew up not far from here." "You thought so." He gave a faint smile. "The way you reacted to the turns, the stops. You were not disoriented." Ayomide blinked. A small detail. Something she had not even noticed herself. Yet he had. She looked away again, unsettled. This was not how she imagined a blind man would speak or observe. The car slowed, then turned into a quieter street. The noise of the city faded, gradually replaced by a calmer atmosphere. Fewer voices, fewer movements. A different kind of stillness, one that did not feel heavy but intentional. "We're here," the driver announced. Ayomide's heart tightened. She was not ready, but she stepped out anyway. The house stood modestly behind a simple gate. Not large, not luxurious, but well kept. Clean lines, fresh paint, a small garden at the front carefully tended. The kind of place that did not demand attention but held quiet pride in its existence. Ayomide paused for a moment, taking it in. This was not what she had expected. She had imagined something worse. Something neglected. Something that matched the way people had spoken about him. But this felt different. "Come, son," said gently. He had already stepped out, standing near the entrance, his posture relaxed, as though he knew exactly where everything was. Ayomide followed slowly. Inside, the difference became even clearer. The house was simple but organized. Everything had a place. Nothing felt abandoned or chaotic. There were books arranged neatly on a shelf, a small dining table with 2 chairs, curtains that allowed just enough light to enter without overwhelming the space. It was not the home of a helpless man. It was the home of someone who paid attention. Ayomide stood just inside the doorway, unsure of what to do. This was her new home. The thought felt unreal. "You can sit," Soon said. She glanced at him. He had already moved further inside, placing his hand lightly on the back of a chair before pulling it out. The movement was smooth, practiced. Ayomide sat slowly. Her eyes moved around the room again, taking in every detail as if trying to understand what kind of life she had just entered. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She hesitated. No. It was a lie. But hunger had become something she no longer spoke about. Soon nodded slightly, as if he understood the answer behind the word. "There is food in the kitchen," he said. "You can eat whenever you want. You don't have to ask." The sentence landed gently, but it stayed. "You don't have to ask." Ayomide lowered her gaze. She did not respond, because she did not yet know how to exist in a space where permission was not required. The afternoon passed quietly. She explored the house slowly, cautiously, as though afraid something might change if she moved too freely. The kitchen was clean, stocked. Not excessively, but enough. More than enough compared to what she had been used to. She opened a cupboard. Rice, beans, canned food. Basic, but consistent. Reliable. Her chest tightened. Not from sadness, but from something unfamiliar. Relief. In the small bedroom, she found a neatly made bed. Not luxurious, but comfortable. There was space for her things, though she had almost none. Ayomide sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on the mattress. For the first time in months, she did not feel like she was intruding. Evening came slowly. The light softened. The air cooled. She returned to the main room. Soon was seated listening to something on a small radio. News, voices discussing politics, business, the shifting state of the country. He listened attentively, not passively, as though every word mattered. "You follow the news?" she asked before thinking. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Yes," he said. "It helps to understand people." Ayomide frowned slightly. "People," he nodded. "Power changes how people behave, but pressure reveals who they really are." The words lingered, simple, but heavy with meaning. Ayomide studied him again. There was something about the way he spoke. Not just educated, but aware. Deeply aware. "You don't sound like—" she began, then stopped. He smiled faintly. "Like what?" She hesitated, then chose her words carefully. "Like what they said." Soon was quiet for a moment. "Then people often describe what they expect," he said, "not what is true." Ayomide felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the certainty she had been holding on to. Later that night, she prepared a simple meal, out of habit, out of instinct. She served him first, placed the plate carefully in front of him, then stepped back, soon paused. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It's fine," she replied quickly. "I'm used to it." He did not argue, but something in his expression changed. Not disapproval, not acceptance, just— They ate in silence. But it was not the same silence as before. It was softer, less suffocating. When the meal ended, Ayomide began to gather the plates. "Leave them," he said. She froze. "I will wash them later," he added. She blinked. "You will," he nodded. "Yes." Ayomide did not move, because nothing in her past had prepared her for this. A man who did not demand, who did not command, who did not treat her presence as an obligation. It unsettled her, more than cruelty ever had. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts refused to settle. Everything she had expected was wrong. Everything she had feared had not appeared. And in its place was something she did not understand. A man who could not see, yet seemed to notice everything. A home she had not chosen, yet felt safer than the one she had been forced to leave. Ayomide closed her eyes slowly, her breathing steady, her body finally beginning to relax. But her mind remained awake, because beneath the quiet, beneath the calm, a question continued to grow. Who exactly was Oluwaseun Balogun, and why did it feel like she had not married a broken man, but stepped into a life that had been carefully hidden? Somewhere in the house, Son sat in silence. The radio now turned off, his head slightly tilted, listening, thinking, and though his eyes remained still, there was nothing uncertain about him, nothing lost, nothing blind, only waiting for the moment when the truth would no longer be able to stay hidden. The days that followed did not change all at once. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic shift that marked the beginning of something new. Instead, life in Oluwaseun Balogun's home unfolded slowly, almost cautiously, like two people learning how to exist in the same space without disturbing the fragile balance between them. Ayomide expected discomfort. She expected tension. She expected the kind of invisible pressure that had defined her life for so long, the feeling of always needing to anticipate someone else's mood, someone else's reaction, someone else's judgment. But none of that came. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. Each morning began quietly. Soon woke early, often before the sun fully rose. Ayomide noticed this on the second day when she stepped into the small sitting area and found him already seated, a cup of tea in his hand, the faint sound of the radio murmuring beside him. He turned his head slightly when she entered. "Good morning," he said. The greeting was simple, but it was consistent, not forced, not performed, just there. Ayomide responded softly. "Good morning." She still felt unsure in these moments, as though she were stepping into something she did not yet understand. But she began to notice that Soon never rushed her, never filled the silence when she hesitated, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He allowed space, and in that space something unfamiliar began to take shape. Routine. Ayomide found herself gradually settling into the rhythm of the house. She cooked, she cleaned, but not because she was ordered to, because she chose to. That difference, though subtle, changed everything. There were no sharp voices behind her, no corrections, no complaints about how something was done. If she made a mistake, it remained just that, a mistake, not a failure of her worth. For the first time in a long while, her actions were not tied to fear. One afternoon, as she prepared food in the kitchen, she noticed Soon standing near the doorway. Not watching, he could not but present. "You measure by sound," he said suddenly. Ayomide paused. "Sorry, the way you poured the rice," he continued. "You didn't look. You listened." She blinked, surprised. "I've been doing it for years," she said. "You learn when there's not enough to waste." Soon nodded slowly. "It's a kind of intelligence people often ignore." The words lingered with her long after he left the doorway. No one had ever described her that way before. Not capable, not intelligent, only useful. As the days passed, Ayomide began to notice other things. Small things at first, then larger ones. Soon knew the neighborhood well. Too well. He could describe routes, distances, and locations with a precision that did not align with someone who rarely left his home. When vendors came by, he recognized their voices immediately, not just by sound, but by subtle differences in tone and mood. "You are tired today," he said to one woman who delivered vegetables. The woman laughed in surprise. "How did you know?" "You spoke more slowly," he replied. Ayomide watched these interactions closely. There was something beyond adaptation here. Something deeper. Then there were the visitors. They did not come often. But when they did, they were careful, respectful, different from the people she had known before. One man arrived in the early evening, dressed neatly, his posture straight, his tone formal. "Good evening, sir," he said. "Sir." Ayomide froze in the kitchen. She had not misheard. Soon's response was calm. "You're early," he said. "I thought it best," the man replied. Their conversation remained low, mostly out of earshot. But the tone was unmistakable. Not pity, not obligation. Respect. When the man left, Ayomide stepped into the room. "Who was that?" she asked. Soon did not answer immediately. "A colleague," he said, after a pause. The word felt insufficient, but Ayomide did not press further. Not yet. That night sleep came easier. Not complete, not peaceful, but less restless than before. Days turned into a week, then another, and somewhere in that time something within Ayomide began to shift. It was not sudden, it was not dramatic, but it was real. She began to feel safe. The realization came quietly one afternoon as she sat near the window mending a tear in one of her wrappers. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft light across the room. The air was still, calm, and for the first time in months, her body was not tense. Her shoulders were not tight. Her breath was not shallow. She was not waiting for something bad to happen. The thought startled her, because safety had never been part of her life for long. Not in her childhood, not in her marriage, not in the house she had just left. And yet here, in a place she had not chosen, with a man she did not know, she found it. That realization frightened her more than anything else, because safety leads to attachment, and attachment leads to loss. That evening, as she prepared dinner, her movements slowed. Her thoughts grew heavier. What if this changed? What if this was temporary? What if everything she was beginning to feel disappeared? "You're quieter than usual," Soon said from the table. Ayomide hesitated, then answered honestly. "I'm thinking." "About what?" She placed the spoon down gently. "About how things are not what I expected." A brief silence followed. "Is that a bad thing?" he asked. Ayomide shook her head slightly. "No," she said. Then, more quietly, "That's what scares me." Soon leaned back slightly in his chair. "As in, you were prepared for something worse." She let out a soft breath. "Yes, and now that it's not, I don't know what to do with it." The honesty in her voice filled the space between them. Soon nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said. "When you've lived with fear for a long time, peace feels unfamiliar, sometimes even dangerous." Ayomide looked at him, truly looked. "How do you know that?" she asked. Soon's expression remained calm, but something shifted. Just slightly. Because I've seen it before, he said. Not I've felt it. Not I've lived it. I've seen it. The distinction was small, but it stayed with her. That night, as Ayomide lay in bed, her thoughts refused to settle. Everything about this life felt layered. Soon was not who people said he was. That much was clear, but he was also not revealing who he truly was. And somehow, that felt intentional. Ayomide turned onto her side, staring into the darkness. Her heart was no longer filled with fear of him, but something else had taken its place. Curiosity. And beneath it, a quiet, growing connection she had not asked for. She closed her eyes slowly, because for the first time since the wedding, she was not just surviving, she was beginning to feel. And somewhere in the stillness of the night, Oluwaseun Balogun sat awake, listening, thinking, waiting, because he knew something Ayomide did not. The truth had already begun to surface, and when it did, nothing between them would remain the same. Not the silence, not the safety, not even the fragile trust that was slowly, quietly, beginning to grow. The sense of quiet stability that had begun to settle over Ayomide's life did not disappear overnight, but it was no longer untouched. It started with something small. A knock. It was late afternoon, the sun still high, but beginning to soften when the sound echoed through the house. Ayomide was in the kitchen, rinsing rice under a slow stream of water when she heard it, firm, deliberate, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten before her mind could even process why. Soon, seated in the main room, tilted his head slightly. "Someone is at the door," he said. "I heard," Ayomide replied. Her hands paused in the basin. She did not move immediately, because something inside her already knew. The knock came again, harder this time, impatient. Ayomide wiped her hands slowly on the edge of her wrapper and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, her heartbeat quickening with a quiet dread she had not felt since leaving the Adebayo house. She opened the door, and there they were, Mama Ayomide and Tosin. For a brief moment no one spoke. The air between them was thick, heavy, with history, unspoken words, and something sharper now, expectation. Mama Ayolade's eyes moved over Ayomide from her face down to her clothes, taking in everything with a calculating stillness. "You look comfortable," she said at last. The word did not sound like approval. It sounded like accusation. Ayomide swallowed. "Yes, Mama," she said softly. Tosin stepped forward slightly, his gaze shifting past her into the house. "This place is better than I thought," he muttered almost to himself. Then louder, "You didn't tell us it was like this." Ayomide frowned faintly. "I didn't know what to tell," she replied. Mama Ayolade did not wait for an invitation. She stepped inside. Tosin followed. Ayomide remained by the door for a second longer, her hand still resting on the handle. Something inside her tightened. This was her space now, the first place that had felt even remotely like hers. And already, it was being entered without permission. "Who is there?" Soon's voice came from inside. Calm, measured, Ayomide stepped forward. "My mother-in-law," she said carefully, "and my brother-in-law." There was a brief pause. "Then please come in," Soon said. Mama Ayolade moved further into the room, her steps slow, deliberate, her eyes scanning everything, the furniture, the arrangement, the quiet order of the space. She sat without asking. Tosin remained standing, his attention drifting across the room with open curiosity. So Mama Ayolade began, her voice smooth but edged with something sharper beneath. "This is where you live." Soon inclined his head slightly. "Yes, it is decent," she continued. Ayomide felt the word press against her chest. Decent. As though she were evaluating something that could be taken. Tosin let out a small laugh. "Better than decent," he said. "You've been hiding this." Soon remained still. "I don't believe I've hidden anything," he replied calmly. The room fell quiet. Ayomide moved toward the kitchen instinctively. A habit she had not yet unlearned, creating space, making herself smaller when tension rose. "You did not tell us he lived like this," Mama Ayolade said, turning her attention back to Ayomide. "I didn't know," Ayomide answered. Mama Ayolade studied her face, long, carefully. Then she smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made Ayomide's stomach tighten. "You are already changing," she said. The words sounded light, but they were not. Before Ayomide could respond, Tosin spoke again. "So, brother," he said, addressing Soon directly, "what exactly do you do?" The question hung in the air. Simple, but loaded. Soon's expression did not shift. "I manage a few things," he said. Tosin frowned. "What things?" "A few things," Soon repeated. The answer was polite, but it closed the door. Tosin's smile faded slightly. He did not like being shut out. Mama Ayomide leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly against her knee. "We did not come here just to visit," she said. Ayomide's chest tightened. "Of course not. There are still responsibilities," Mama Ayomide continued. Ayomide looked at her. "Responsibilities." Mama Ayomide's gaze sharpened. "You were part of this family," she said. "That does not disappear just because you have married again." The words felt like a net being cast. Ayomide shook her head slightly. "I have nothing left," she said quietly. Tosin laughed. "That is not what it looks like," he said, gesturing around the room. Ayomide's stomach turned. "This is not mine," she said. Mama Ayomide leaned forward slightly. "But you are here," she replied. Silence followed. Soon spoke then. Calm. Clear. "Ayomide is not responsible for anything that belongs to your household anymore," he said. The words landed gently, but firmly. Mama Ayomide turned toward him slowly. "And you are?" she asked. Soon did not hesitate. "I am her husband." The room shifted, subtly, but undeniably. It was not the word itself. It was how he said it. Not possessive, not performative, definitive. Tosin scoffed. "You just met her," he said. Soon inclined his head slightly. "And yet I understand something you seem to have missed." Tosin's expression hardened. "That she is not an obligation," Soon continued, "and not an asset." The silence that followed was heavy. Ayomide stood frozen, her heart pounding. No one had ever spoken for her like that before. Not Kunle. Not anyone. Mama Ayolade's expression changed. Only slightly. "But enough. You speak well," she said slowly. "For someone in your condition." The insult was subtle, but intentional. Soon did not react. "I speak based on what I understand," he replied. Mama Ayolade held his gaze for a moment longer, then leaned back again. "We will return," she said. Not a threat, not a promise, something in between. They stood to leave. Tosin cast one last glance around the room, calculating. "This is not over," he muttered under his breath. Ayomide heard it, and she knew. He was right. When the door finally closed behind them, the house felt different. Not broken, not unsafe, but no longer untouched. Ayomide stood still for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. "They will come back," she said quietly. Son nodded. "Yes," he replied. She turned toward him. "You knew," she said. It was not a question. Soon paused. "I expected it," he said. Ayomide's chest tightened. "Why?" she asked. Soon's expression remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath it. "Because people rarely let go of what they believe they can still control," he said. The words settled into the room. Ayomide looked down. For the first time since leaving that house, she felt its shadow again, not over her, but reaching toward her. And this time, it was not just her life at risk. It was something else, something fragile, something new, the quiet peace she had only just begun to understand. And somewhere beneath it all, a realization began to form. Soon was not just protecting her. He was preparing for something that had not yet fully revealed itself. And whatever it was coming. The tension did not explode. It settled, quietly, like dust after a storm, thin, almost invisible, but present in every breath. After Mama, Ayolade and Tosin left the house, returned to its usual silence, but it was no longer the same kind of silence Ayomide had begun to trust. There was something beneath it now, something unsettled, something that made her more aware of every sound, every pause, every movement. That evening she moved through the kitchen more slowly than usual. Her hands followed familiar routines, washing, cutting, stirring, but her thoughts wandered elsewhere. Back to the look in Tosin's eyes. Back to the way Mama Ayolade had scanned the room, not with curiosity, but with quiet calculation. They had not come to visit. They had come to assess. And now they would return. "You are thinking too loudly again." Soon's voice broke through her thoughts. Ayomide paused, turning slightly toward the doorway where he stood. "I didn't know. Thinking made noise," she said softly. "It does," he replied. "Not with sound, with presence." She looked at him carefully. There it was again. That strange way he seemed to understand things beyond what he should. They won't stop, she said after a moment. Soon did not ask who. I know, he answered. Ayomide's fingers tightened slightly around the spoon in her hand. They will keep coming, she continued. Asking, taking, turning everything into something they can use. Soon stepped into the room slowly, his movements steady, controlled. They can try, he said. The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. Try, she repeated. He nodded. Yes, Ayomide frowned. You don't understand them, she said. They don't stop because they are told to stop. They stop when there is nothing left to take. Soon was quiet for a moment. Then we make sure they find nothing to take. The words sounded calm. But they carried weight. Not avoidance. Not fear. Control. Ayomide studied him again, something inside her shifting. Why do you speak like that? She asked quietly. Soon tilted his head slightly. Like what? Like you're not worried. A faint smile touched his lips. Worry is useful when it changes something, he said. Otherwise, it's just noise. Ayomide exhaled slowly. She didn't know whether to find comfort in that or fear it. The next morning the shift came. Not from her past, but from the world outside. Ayomide had just stepped out to buy vegetables when she noticed the small crowd gathered at the far end of the street. Voices overlapped, urgent, uneven. She hesitated, then moved closer. What happened? She asked a woman standing nearby. It's Chinedu's boy, the woman said quickly. He collapsed this morning. They say it's his heart. Ayomide's chest tightened. How old is he? 8. The word landed heavily. She pushed forward through the small crowd. The boy lay on the ground, his body limp, his breathing shallow, his mother kneeling beside him, her voice breaking as she called his name over and over again. Someone call a car, she cried. Please, someone help me. But no one moved. Not fast enough. Not decisively, because help in places like this often arrived too late. Ayomide stepped forward. We need to get him to a hospital, she said. We don't have money, the mother replied, her voice trembling. The familiar words. The familiar barrier. Ayomide swallowed. For a moment she froze, because she knew that feeling. The helplessness, the waiting, the silent calculation of what a life was worth. Then she turned and ran back to the house. Her breath came fast, uneven, her heart pounding as she pushed the door open. Soon, he was already standing. There's a child, she said quickly. He's not breathing properly. They need help. We need. Where Soon asked. She blinked. No hesitation. No confusion. At the end of the street, she said. Call the driver, he said immediately. Ayomide froze. What driver? Soon reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Sleek. Modern. Not something she had seen him use before. He dialed quickly. Bring the car, he said. Now. No explanation. No delay. Ayomide stared. Within minutes, a car arrived. Not the one from the wedding. Different, cleaner, more polished. The driver stepped out quickly. Sir. Again. Help her, Soon said, gesturing slightly toward Ayomide. Everything moved quickly after that. They returned to the boy, lifted him carefully, placed him in the car. Ayomide sat beside the mother, holding the boy's hand, whispering softly, though she did not know what she was saying. The hospital was not far, but the time felt endless. When they arrived, everything shifted again. No delays, no arguments, no questions about payment. The staff moved immediately. Doctors came. Equipment was brought in. The boy was taken inside. Ayomide stood there, her chest rising and falling, her hands trembling. This was not how things usually worked. She knew that. After some time, a doctor approached. Who brought him in? She asked. Ayomide stepped forward. We did. The doctor nodded. You came just in time, she said. Another few minutes. She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The boy would live. The mother broke down in tears, grabbing Ayomide's hands. Thank you, she cried. Thank you. Ayomide shook her head. It wasn't me, she said. She turned. Soon stood a few steps behind, calm, still. The doctor looked at him. Recognition flickered across her face. Brief, but real. Sir, she said. Soon nodded slightly. Something passed between them. Unspoken, but understood. Ayomide saw it. And in that moment, everything inside her shifted again. This was not coincidence. This was not luck. This was not the life of a helpless man. They returned home in silence, but this time it was different. Not uncertain, but heavy with realization. When they stepped inside, Ayomide turned to him, her voice quieter than before. "You knew exactly what to do," she said. Son did not deny it. "You made one call," she continued, "and everything moved." He remained still. "That's not normal," she said. "A pose." "No," he agreed. Ayomide's breath caught. The honesty. It confirmed what she had been trying not to see. "You're not who they think you are," she said. Son tilted his head slightly. "People think many things," he replied. "That's not an answer." "No," he said softly. "It's not." Silence stretched between them. Ayomide's heart pounded. "Then what are you hiding?" she asked. Son did not respond immediately. For the first time there was hesitation, not fear, but choice. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Something that will change everything," he said. Ayomide felt the words settle deep inside her, because she already knew. The truth was no longer hidden, it was waiting. And when it came, nothing would remain the same. Not this house. Not this silence. Not even the fragile connection that had begun to grow between them. Ayomide turned away slowly, her heart no longer filled with fear, but something far more dangerous. Expectation, and somewhere beneath it, the quiet, undeniable certainty that the man she had been forced to marry was not a man to be pitied, but a man whose world was far bigger than hers, and she had just stepped into it, without understanding the cost. The house did not feel the same after the hospital. Nothing had visibly changed. The furniture remained where it had always been. The curtains still filtered the same soft light. The air carried the same quiet calm, but something beneath it had shifted. A layer had been peeled back, revealing the outline of a truth Ayomide could no longer ignore. She had seen it. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. That night, she could not sleep. She lay on her side, her eyes open, her thoughts restless. Every moment from the day replayed itself with sharper clarity. The speed of the car, the unquestioned authority at the hospital, the way the doctor had looked at Soon. Recognition, respect, not curiosity, not pity. Ayomide turned onto her back, staring at the ceiling. "Who are you?" she whispered into the darkness. But the room gave her no answer. The next morning came slower than usual. She woke late. The sunlight had already filled the room, soft but insistent, as if trying to pull her out of the thoughts she had carried through the night. When she stepped into the main room, Sun was not there. For the first time since she arrived, he was gone. Her chest tightened. Not with fear, but with something unfamiliar. Unease. "Where did he go?" she asked the empty space. There was no response. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, not safe, but incomplete. Ayomide moved through the house slowly, her eyes more alert than before, noticing details she had overlooked in her first days there. The bookshelf, the arrangement of items on the table, the small drawer near the wall. She paused. Something about it felt deliberate. She hesitated, then stepped closer. The drawer was closed. Not locked, but not something she had ever seen him open. Her hand hovered over it. She knew she should not, but curiosity once awakened is difficult to silence. Slowly, she pulled it open. Inside there were documents, neatly arranged, organized, not the scattered papers of an ordinary home. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked one up. A name, Balogun Holdings Group. Her breath caught. She flipped through another, then another. Financial reports, business letters, official stamps. Her heart began to race. This was not a small business. This was not a few things. This was something else entirely. Ayomide stepped back slightly, her mind struggling to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Balogun. The name echoed in her memory. She had heard it before. Not in conversation. Not directly, but in passing. In the news, in the background of discussions she had never paid attention to. A company. A powerful one. Her hands shook. "No," she whispered. It didn't make sense. The man she lived with, the man the world had mocked, could not belong to something like this. Unless, her thoughts stopped, unless everything she had been told was a lie. The sound of the door opening made her freeze. Ayomide turned quickly. Soon stepped inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he tilted his head slightly. "You opened it." Not a question, A statement. Ayomide's breath caught. She had not made a sound. She had barely moved. And yet, he knew. She began, but the words faltered. Soon stepped forward slowly. His expression was calm. But something deeper had shifted. Not anger, not disappointment, but inevitability. It was always going to happen, he said quietly. Ayomide stared at him. What is this? She asked, her voice shaking despite her effort to control it. Soon did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved past her, closing the drawer gently. The small, careful motion felt heavier than any sudden reaction. You were not supposed to find it like this, he said. Then how? Ayomide asked, her voice rising slightly. Soon turned toward her. His eyes remained unfocused. But his presence, sharp, aware. Not like this, he repeated. Ayomide shook her head. No, she said. You don't get to say that. Her chest rose and fell quickly now. I have been living in this house, in this life, not knowing anything, she continued. Everyone treated you like you were nothing. Her voice broke slightly. And now I find this. She gestured toward the drawer. What am I supposed to believe? Silence filled the space. Heavy. Real. Soon exhaled slowly. What you saw at the hospital, he said, was not an accident. Ayomide let out a small hollow laugh. I know that. Another pause. Then, I am not what they think I am, Soon said. The words settled into the room. Simple, but final. Ayomide stared at him. That's not enough, she said. Soon nodded slightly. I know. For a moment it seemed like he might stop there. But then, my name is Oluwaseun Balogun, he continued. That part is true. Ayomide's breath slowed. But the life you were told I lived, he paused. It is not. The truth, even incomplete, hit harder than she expected. Ayomide stepped back slightly. So what is this? She asked. Soon's voice lowered. It is protection. The word hung in the air. Ayomide frowned. From what? Soon did not answer immediately. And that silence told her everything she needed to know. From people like them, she asked. Soon tilted his head slightly. And worse. Ayomide's heart pounded. You lied to me, she said. The accusation was quiet, but heavy. Soon did not deny it. Yes, the honesty stung more than denial would have. Ayomide swallowed hard. I was forced into this marriage, she said. I had no choice. Her voice trembled. And now I find out I was brought into something I don't even understand. Soon stepped closer. Not threatening, not forceful, but present. I did not choose how we met, he said. Ayomide shook her head. But you chose not to tell me the truth. Another silence. Then, yes, he said again. The word landed. Final. Ayomide turned away. Her chest tight. Her thoughts racing. Everything she had begun to feel. The safety. The quiet trust. All of it cracked. Not because he was rich, but because he had hidden it. Because she had not been given the choice to understand. I need time, she said finally. Her voice steadier now, but distant. Son nodded. I understand. Ayomide walked toward the door, not leaving, just needing space. The air outside felt different. Sharper, clearer, but no less heavy. Because now, there were no more illusions, no more simple explanations, only truth. And the realization that the life she had stepped into was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Behind her, inside the house, Soon remained still, listening, waiting. Because he knew something Ayomide was only beginning to understand. The truth was not just about who he was. It was about what was coming, and once it arrived, there would be no turning back. The truth did not arrive all at once. It unfolded, slowly, reluctantly, like something that had been held back for too long and could no longer remain hidden. After that moment by the drawer, the house felt divided, not physically but emotionally. Ayomide moved through it as though she no longer knew where she stood within its walls. Every object seemed to carry a second meaning now. Every silence felt layered with things unsaid. She did not avoid Soon, but she no longer moved toward him either. That evening the sky darkened earlier than usual, heavy clouds gathering above the city, casting long shadows across the street. Ayomide sat by the window, her fingers resting loosely in her lap, her thoughts still tangled in the same questions that had not left her since morning. Soon was in the room behind her. She could feel it, not because of sound, but because of presence. You should ask, he said quietly. Ayomide did not turn. I don't know what to ask anymore, she replied. A pause followed, not uncomfortable, but necessary. Then I will tell you, Soon said. This time she did turn. Slowly. He stood near the table, his posture composed, his face calm, but there was something different in the air now. A shift. A decision. I was not born into this house, he began. Ayomide listened, not interrupting, not reacting, just listening. My father built something, Soon continued. Something large, something powerful. Balogun Holdings did not start as what it is now. It grew. And with that growth came attention. Ayomide's chest tightened slightly. She had heard the name. Now it carried weight. Attention brings interest, he said. And interest brings enemies. The words settled slowly. Ayomide frowned faintly. You're saying you're in danger. Soon tilted his head slightly. I'm saying I was. The distinction mattered. What happened? She asked. Sun was quiet for a moment. Then, there was an accident, he said. Or at least, it was meant to look like one. Ayomide's breath caught. My car was forced off the road, he continued. It should have ended there. The calmness in his voice made it more unsettling. But it didn't. Ayomide stepped closer without realizing it. I survived, he said. But I lost something in the process. She looked at his eyes. Your sight. Soon nodded slowly. Partially, he said. Temporarily. Ayomide froze. Temporarily. The word echoed in her mind. You mean, she began, her voice tightening. You're not completely blind, he finished. The truth landed. Heavy. Ayomide took a step back. Everything she had built in her mind began to collapse. So all of this, she gestured around the room. It's an act. Sun did not answer immediately. It is protection, he said again. Ayomide let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Protection, she repeated. From who? And why? Involve me. Sun's expression remained steady. I did not involve you, he said. The answer surprised her. What do you mean, she asked. I disappeared, he explained. After the incident. Publicly, I was reported as recovering in isolation. Privately, I removed myself from everything. Business, attention, visibility. Ayomide's mind struggled to keep up. And this life, she asked. I needed to observe, he said. To understand who could be trusted, who could not. The people who attacked me were not strangers. They were close. Too close. A chill ran through her. Your own people, she whispered. Soon did not confirm. But he did not deny it either. And so you became... Ayomide hesitated, searching for the word. Invisible, Soon said. The words settled heavily between them. Ayomide shook her head slowly. You let people think you were helpless, she said. Yes. You let them mock you. Yes. Her voice rose slightly. You let them treat you like you were nothing. Soon's expression did not change. Yes. The repetition hit harder each time. Why, she asked, almost breathless. Soon took a slow breath. Because people reveal themselves when they believe you have nothing, he said. Silence filled the room. Ayomide stared at him. And what did you learn? She asked. Soon's voice lowered. Everything I needed to know. The words carried weight. Danger. Ayomide's chest tightened again. And me, she asked. The question came quietly. But it held more than anything else she had said. Soon paused. Then, you were not part of the plan. The answer came without hesitation. Ayomide swallowed. But I became part of it anyway, she said. Soon nodded. Yes. The honesty cut deeper than any lie. Ayomide turned away again. Her mind raced. Her emotions tangled. I was forced into this marriage, she said slowly. I had no choice. Her voice steadied. And now you're telling me. I've been living inside something dangerous, something hidden. Seon did not argue. Yes. Ayomide laughed softly. Not from amusement, but disbelief. So what happens now, she asked. Soon's answer came quietly. That depends. On what? On how much you want to know. The room fell silent again. Ayomide stood there, her thoughts pulling in different directions. Part of her wanted to walk away. To leave everything behind. To return to something simple, even if it was painful. But another part, stronger now, wanted the truth. All of it. No more hiding, she said finally. Soon nodded. No more hiding. The agreement felt heavier than a promise, because it meant something else. The beginning of something irreversible. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm that had been building all day was finally arriving, And inside the house another storm had already begun. Not of fear, but of truth. Ayomide looked at him again. Not as a stranger, not as a helpless man, but as someone whose life was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And somehow, she was now part of it. Not by choice, but by fate, and there was no stepping out of it now. Only forward, into whatever came next. The truth did not bring clarity. It brought weight. After Soon's revelation, the house felt smaller, not in space, but in certainty. Every corner now carried the echo of something larger beyond its walls. The quiet that once felt safe now felt like a pause before something inevitable. Ayomide moved through the next few days with a different awareness. She no longer saw Soon as a man surviving quietly. She saw him as someone waiting. And waiting, she realized, was not passive. It was preparation. But no matter how much she tried to steady herself, one truth refused to settle inside her. She had not chosen any of this. Not the marriage, not the secrets, not the danger. That realization sat heavy in her chest the morning Mama Ayomide returned. This time there was no hesitation in the knock. It came sharp, demanding. Ayomide opened the door slowly. Mama Ayomide stood there again, but she was not the same as before. The careful observation had disappeared. In its place was something more direct. Expectation. Beside her stood Tosin, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, scanning everything even before stepping inside. "You did not come to see me," Ayomide said quietly. Mama Ayolade's lips curved into a faint smile. "At least you are learning," she replied. They stepped inside without waiting. Soon was already in the room, standing, waiting. The air shifted immediately. Mama Ayolade did not bother with pleasantries this time. "We know," she said. The words landed like a strike. Ayomide's breath caught. Soon did not move. "Know what?" he asked calmly. Tosin let out a short laugh. "You really expect us to pretend," he said. "You think we wouldn't find out." Ayomide turned sharply toward them. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Mama Ayolade's gaze flicked toward her briefly. Then back to Soon. "Balagun Holdings," she said. The name filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Ayomide felt her chest tighten again. So it had spread. So Tosin continued stepping forward slightly. The blind man is not so helpless after all. Soon's expression remained unchanged. "Information travels quickly," he said. Mama Ayolade laughed softly. "Especially when it is valuable." Ayomide felt something inside her shift again. This was not curiosity. This was strategy. "You should have told us," Mama Ayolade continued, her tone almost conversational now. "We are family after all." The word sounded hollow. Soon tilted his head slightly. "Family," he repeated. "Yes," she said. "Ayomide was part of this house. That makes you connected to us." Ayomide clenched her hands. "No," she said firmly. The word surprised even her. Mama Ayolade turned toward her slowly. "What did you say?" "Ayomide metargaze." "I said no," she repeated. "I was not treated like family." Silence fell. Tosin scoffed. "Now you remember your voice," he said. Ayomide did not respond, because for the first time, she did not feel small. Mama Ayolade's expression hardened slightly. "We are not here to argue about the past," she said. "We are here to discuss the future." Ayomide's stomach tightened. "There is nothing to discuss," she replied. Tosin laughed again. "Oh, there is," he said. "A lot." Sun spoke then. "What do you want?" he asked. The directness cut through everything else. Mama Ayolade smiled again. "There it is," she said softly. "Understanding." She leaned forward slightly. "You are a man of influence," she continued. "A man of means. That changes things." Ayomide felt the words press against her chest. "Not for me," she said. Mama Ayolade ignored her. "We have struggled," she went on. "After Kunle's death, things have not been easy." Ayomide almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the audacity. "You made it that way," she said quietly. "Mama?" Ayolade's eyes flashed. "Careful," she warned. But Ayomide did not step back. "You took everything from me," she continued. "And now you come here asking for more." The room grew tense. Tosin stepped forward. "This is not about you," he said. Ayomide met his gaze. "It never was," she replied. Soon remained silent, watching, listening, measuring. Mama Ayolade exhaled slowly. "You are being emotional," she said. "This is business." Ayomide shook her head. "No," she said. "This is greed." The word landed. Sharp, unavoidable. For a moment, Mama Iolade's mask slipped. Then, she straightened. Fine, she said. Let us speak clearly. Her eyes moved to Soon. We expect support, she said. Financial. Consistent. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Demand. Son did not react immediately. And if I refuse, he asked. Tosin smirked. You won't, he said. Soon turned slightly toward him. Why not? Tosin's smile widened. Because people will talk, he said. About how you abandoned your wife's family. Ayomide's chest tightened. There it was. Control. Reputation. Pressure. Mama Iolade nodded. We are not unreasonable, she added. We simply expect what is appropriate. The silence that followed stretched. Heavy. Then. No. Soon's voice was calm. But final. Ayomide felt something shift inside her. Mama Iolade blinked. I beg your pardon. I said no, Soon repeated. The word did not rise. Did not sharpen, but it held. Tosin's expression darkened. You think this is a game, he said. Soon turned his head slightly. No, he replied. I think it is a test. The room stilled, and you have already failed. The words landed quietly, but with force. Mama Iolade stood. You will regret this, she said. Soon did not move. I doubt that he replied. Tosin stepped closer. You don't know who you're dealing with, he said. Soon's expression remained unchanged. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, he said. Silence. Sharp. Uncomfortable. Then, they turned and left. The door closed behind them. This time, heavier. Final. Ayomide stood still, her heart racing. They won't stop, she said. Son nodded. I know. She turned toward him. This is because of me, she said. Soon shook his head. No, he replied. This was always coming. Ayomide's chest tightened. What happens now, she asked. Soon was quiet for a moment. Then, now he said, we stop reacting. Ayomide frowned. And start what? Soon's voice lowered slightly. Preparing. The words settled into the room, different from before. More serious. More certain. Ayomide felt it. The shift. This was no longer about suspicion. No longer about questions. This was something else. Something bigger. And for the first time, she understood. The danger he had spoken about was no longer distant. It was here, and it had just walked through their door. After Mama Iolade and Tosin left, the air inside the house did not settle. It thickened. What had once been a quiet refuge now felt like a place that had been seen marked and would soon be tested. Ayomide sensed it in the way the evening stretched longer than usual, in the way every distant sound seemed closer, sharper, more deliberate. Soon did not say much after that, but he did not return to stillness either. The next morning everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Ayomide woke to the sound of voices. Low, controlled, unfamiliar. She sat up immediately, her heart tightening as she listened. They were in the main room. More than one person. She stepped out carefully. Two men stood near the table, well-dressed, composed, not like neighbors, not like family, and not like visitors. They carried themselves with purpose. Soon stood across from them. His posture was different, not relaxed, not passive, present, commanding. Ayomide stopped just at the edge of the doorway. It's moving faster than expected, one of the men was saying. We anticipated that, Sun replied. His voice was calm, but firmer than she had ever heard it. The board is already divided, the other man added. If Ajayi pushes again, he could. He won't, Sun interrupted. The certainty in his tone silenced the rest of the sentence. Ayomide's breath slowed. This was not the man she had been speaking to in the kitchen. This was someone else. Or perhaps, this was who he had always been. The men noticed her then. Their conversation stopped. Their eyes shifted, assessing. Soon turned his head slightly. Ayomide, he said. Her name sounded different in that moment. Not softer, but acknowledged. She stepped forward slowly. The men straightened slightly. Ma'am, one of them said politely. The respect in his voice felt unfamiliar. Too formal. Too deliberate. These are my associates, Soon said. We're discussing something important. Ayomide nodded. I can come back later, she said. No, Soon replied. The words stopped her. You should hear this, he added. Her chest tightened. Something inside her told her. This was the moment everything shifted. They sat, not comfortably, but with purpose. The situation is no longer contained, the first man said. Folarin Ajayi has begun moving assets through intermediaries. Quietly, Ayomide frowned. Who is Folarin Ajayi, she asked. Soon answered. Someone who believes what belongs to my family can become his. The simplicity of the statement carried weight. And he tried to kill you, Ayomide said. Soon did not respond immediately. Os. Then? Yes. The word landed. Cold. Real. Ayomide's breath caught. So this isn't over, she said. No, Soon replied. It never was. Silence followed. Then, why am I here? Ayomide asked quietly. Soon turned toward her. Because you are already part of this, he said. Her chest tightened. I didn't choose that. I know. The answer came without hesitation. And yet, he continued, you are still here. Ayomide looked at him. The words were not a challenge. They were a truth. One she had already begun to understand. The first man leaned forward slightly. There's more, he said. Ajayi knows about the marriage. Ayomide froze. What does that mean? She asked. It means the second man replied carefully that you are no longer invisible. The words settled into the room. Heavy. Dangerous. Ayomide's fingers tightened in her lap. So he will come after me, she asked. Soon did not soften the answer. Yes. The honesty was immediate, unfiltered. Ayomide closed her eyes briefly. Not in fear, but in recognition. This was real. There was no stepping away from it now. The rest of the conversation unfolded with details she struggled to fully grasp. Names, movements, strategies, numbers, but one thing became clear. This was not just about money. It was about control, power, and survival. When the men finally left, the house felt quieter again, but not safer. Never safer. Ayomide stood near the window, her thoughts moving faster than she could follow. You should go, Soon said behind her. She turned. What? You can leave, he said. Before this becomes worse. The words surprised her. You want me to go? I want you to have a choice, he replied. Ayomide let out a slow breath. There was a time I would have taken that, she said. Soon remained silent. But now, she continued. She shook her head slightly. Now, I don't even know where I would go. The truth sat between them, not as weakness, but as reality. And even if I did, she added, it wouldn't change anything, would it? Soon did not answer, because he didn't need to. Ayomide already knew. The afternoon passed slowly, too slowly. Every sound felt amplified. Every silence felt intentional. Then, the message came, a phone vibrating on the table. Soon reached for it, paused, then answered. Yes. His voice remained calm. But something shifted. Ayomide could hear it. In the stillness. In the tension beneath the words. No, Soon said after a moment. That won't happen. A pause. Then, tell him he's made a mistake. The line went dead. Ayomide stepped closer. What was that? She asked. Soon lowered the phone slowly. Ajayi, he said. Her chest tightened. What did he say? Soon's expression remained steady, but his voice lowered slightly. He said he wants to meet you. The words hit harder than anything before. Ayomide felt the ground shift beneath her. Me, she whispered. Soon nodded. Yes. Why? Soon's answer came quietly. Because you matter now. The realization settled deep inside her. This was no longer about watching from the outside, no longer about learning slowly. She was inside it now, fully, and there was no way out. Ayomide straightened slightly, her hands no longer trembling, her voice steadier than before. When she asked, Sun looked at her, carefully. As soon as we're ready, he said. Ayomide nodded, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she understood something now. Running would not save her. Silence would not protect her. And for the first time, she made a choice. Not forced, not taken, but hers. I'm not leaving, she said. Soon held still for a moment, then nodded. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted again, not just between them, but within her. The woman who had once been pushed into a marriage without a voice was now stepping forward, into danger, with her eyes open. And somewhere beyond the walls of that house, Folarin Ajayi was already watching, already planning, already moving, because the game he had started was finally reaching its most dangerous stage. And Ayomide, whether she was ready or not, had just become part of it. The meeting was set for the following evening. Not at Soon's house, not at any place that could be traced easily, but in a neutral location, one that carried the illusion of safety while hiding the tension beneath it. a private lounge inside an upscale hotel on the edge of Victoria Island where deals were often made quietly and reputations protected by discretion. Ayomide had never been to a place like that before, but she did not say it. The day leading up to it passed with a strange stillness. No visitors, no unexpected calls, no visible signs of the storm that was approaching, and yet everything felt like it was building towards something inevitable. Soon did not leave the house. But he was not idle. There were calls, brief, controlled, purposeful. Names spoken in low tones. Instructions given without repetition. Ayomide watched him from a distance, not intruding, not questioning, but learning. This was not just a man protecting himself. This was a man positioning himself. "You don't look afraid," she said at one point, standing near the doorway as he ended another call. Soon placed the phone down slowly. "I am," he replied. The answer surprised her. "You are?" she asked. He nodded slightly. "Fear is useful," he said. "It sharpens decisions." Ayomide considered that. "And if it doesn't," she asked. "Then it becomes a weakness," he said. The room fell quiet again. Ayomide took a slow breath. "I don't want to be a weakness," she said. Soon turned his head slightly toward her. "You're not," he replied. The certainty in his voice steadied something inside her. But it did not erase the truth. She was stepping into a situation she did not fully understand. And there would be no second chances. By evening the car was ready. The same driver. The same quiet efficiency. But this time the atmosphere was different. Not uncertain. Focused. Ayomide sat beside Soon as the city lights passed by, reflecting against the window in blurred streaks of gold and white. "You can still change your mind," Soon said. She didn't look at him. "No," she replied. A pause. "Why?" he asked. Ayomide exhaled slowly. "Because if I walk away now," she said, "I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I ran from." Soon nodded. "That's fair." The hotel stood tall against the night sky. Bright. Controlled. Immaculate. A place where power dressed itself in elegance. They were led inside without delay. No questions. No hesitation. Someone was expecting them. The lounge was quiet. Dim lighting. Soft music. Few people. And at the center, he sat. Folarin Ajayi. Ayomide felt it immediately. The presence. Not loud. Not aggressive. But undeniable. He did not stand when they approached. He watched. Calm. Measured. "Soon Balogun," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. Soon inclined his head slightly. "Ajayi." No titles. No formalities. Just names. And history behind them. Ajayi's gaze shifted. To Ayomide. And stayed there a moment longer than necessary. So he said softly, "This is the woman." Ayomide held his gaze. Not challenging. But not retreating either. "Yes," she said. Ajayi smiled faintly. "Stronger than I expected," he said. Ayomide did not respond. Because she understood something immediately. This man was not testing her words. He was measuring her reactions. "Sit," Ajayi said. They did. Soon remained composed. Ayomide followed his lead. "I'll be direct," Ajayi began. "Please do," Soon replied. Ajayi leaned back slightly. "You disappeared," he said. "That complicated things." Soon said nothing. "You were supposed to stay visible," Ajayi continued. "Predictable. Manageable." Ayomide's chest tightened. This was not just rivalry. This was control. "But you chose to vanish," Ajayi said. "And now you've returned." A pause. Unexpectedly. Soon's voice remained calm. "I didn't return," he said. "You found me." Ajayi smiled again. "That's true." Silence stretched. "Then, let's not pretend this is about business anymore," Ajayi said. The shift was subtle, but clear. "This is about power," he continued. "And control." Ayomide felt the tension in the room tighten. "You tried to kill him," she said suddenly. The words came before she could stop them. Ajayi turned to her. Not surprised. Not offended. Interested. "Did I?" he asked calmly. Ayomide held his gaze. "Yes." A small smile touched his lips. "Then I must have failed," he said. Soon did not react, but something in the air shifted. Ajayi leaned forward slightly. "I don't repeat mistakes," he added. The words settled. Heavy. Threatening. Ayomide felt it clearly now. This was not negotiation. This was positioning. "So what do you want?" Soon asked. Direct. Unmoved. Ajayi's eyes returned to him. "What I've always wanted," he said. "Control of the company." The room fell silent. Soon's expression did not change. "That won't happen," he said. Ajayi nodded slowly. I expected that answer. Another pause. Then, which is why I came prepared. He gestured slightly. A man stepped forward from the shadows and placed a folder on the table. Ayomide's chest tightened. What is that? She asked. Ajayi's voice was calm. Leverage. Soon did not reach for it, but Ayomide did. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Photos, documents, records, and then her breath stopped. It was her. Images of her. At the market. At the hospital. At the house. Watched. Tracked. Her hands tightened around the folder. You've been following me, she said. Ajayi tilted his head slightly. Observing, he corrected. Ayomide felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Something else. Anger. You think this gives you power, she asked. Ajayi smiled. It gives me options. Soon spoke then, his voice lower than before. You don't involve her, he said. Ajayi's eyes flicked toward him. But she's already involved, he replied. The truth landed. Sharp. Unavoidable. The room held still. And in that moment, everything became clear. This was not just a confrontation. This was a declaration. A line drawn. And Ayomide was standing directly in the middle of it. The room did not erupt. It tightened, after the folder slid across the table, and Ayomide's eyes met the undeniable truth inside it. Images of her life, her movements, her private moments reduced to evidence. The silence that followed was heavier than any raised voice. This was no longer a conversation. It was a confrontation. Ayomide placed the folder down slowly, her fingers steady despite the storm rising inside her. The fear she had expected did not come the way it once would have. It was there, yes, but it had been reshaped into something else. Clarity. You've been watching me, she said, her voice calm now. Not trembling, not breaking. Folarin Ajayi regarded her with a faint, measured smile. I've been watching what matters to him, he replied. The words settled between them. Cold, intentional. Ayomide did not look away. Then you've been watching the wrong thing, she said. A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed Ajayi's face. It disappeared almost instantly, replaced by the same controlled composure. Have I? He asked. Soon spoke, then his voice lower than before, carrying a quiet weight that shifted the energy of the room. You're overplaying your hand, he said. Ajayi leaned back slightly, studying him. Or maybe he replied, I'm finally playing it properly. The tension between them was no longer subtle. It was direct. Unhidden. Two men who understood each other too well, standing on opposite sides of a line that could not be crossed without consequence. Ayomide sat between them, not physically but in meaning. She felt it now with complete certainty. She was no longer incidental. She was part of the equation. What do you want from me? She asked suddenly. The question shifted the focus. Ajayi turned his attention fully to her again. For a moment he did not answer. Then I want you to understand your position, he said. Ayomide frowned slightly. My position, Ajayi nodded. You are not just his wife, he said. You are his weakness. The word hung in the air. Ayomide felt something inside her react immediately, not with fear, but with rejection. No, she said. The answer came before she could stop it. Ajayi's brow lifted slightly. Confidence, he observed. Ayomide leaned forward just a little. Clarity, she corrected. Silence followed. Then Soon spoke again. She is not your leverage, he said. Ajayi's expression sharpened slightly. She already is, he replied. The truth of that statement was undeniable. And yet, Ayomide shook her head. No, she said again. Both men turned toward her. She took a slow breath. If you think you can use me to control him, she continued, then you don't understand anything about what's happening here. Ajayi studied her more carefully now. Not dismissing, not mocking, reevaluating. And what exactly is happening here, he asked. Ayomide's voice softened but did not weaken. He didn't choose me, she said. And I didn't choose him. A brief pause. But I'm still here. The simplicity of the statement carried something deeper. Something neither man could ignore. Ajayi's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not power, he said. Ayomide met his gaze. No, she replied. It's choice. The word shifted the space, not loudly, but definitively. Soon remained still. But something in his posture changed. Subtle, but real. Ajayi leaned forward again, his fingers resting lightly against the table. You think choice protects you? He asked. Ayomide did not hesitate. No, she said. Another pause. But it defines me. The room fell quiet. For the first time since the meeting began, the tension shifted not toward escalation, but toward something else. Recognition. Ajayi sat back slowly. "You're not what I expected," he said. Ayomide did not respond, because she wasn't sure what that meant, and she didn't need to. Soon broke the silence. "This ends now," he said. Ajayi's gaze returned to him. "Does it?" he asked. Soon's voice remained calm. "You've made your position clear," he said. "So have I." Ajayi nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "You have." Another pause. Then, "But clarity doesn't end conflict," Ajayi added. The words landed softly, but with intent. Seun did not respond, because he understood. This was not over. It had only begun. Ajayi stood. The movement was smooth. Unhurried, he adjusted his jacket slightly, his composure intact. "Think carefully about what comes next," he said. His eyes moved briefly to Ayomide. "Both of you." Then he turned and walked away. The room remained still long after he left. Ayomide exhaled slowly, her body only now registering the tension it had been holding. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting against her knees. "He meant it," she said quietly. Seun nodded. "Yes." She turned toward him. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. Ayomide closed her eyes briefly. Not in defeat, but in acceptance. When she opened them again, something had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "What do we do?" she asked. Soon was quiet for a moment. "Then, we finish it," he said. The words settled between them. "Final. Certain." Ayomide nodded slowly, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she understood now. There was no returning to what had been, no stepping back into a smaller life, no pretending this was something simple. She had stepped into this world, and now she would stand in it, not as leverage, not as weakness, but as herself. Outside, the night carried on as usual. Cars moved, voices rose and fell. The city remained alive, but somewhere within it, lines had been drawn, decisions had been made, and the next move would not be quiet. The night after the meeting did not bring rest. It brought resolve. Ayomide returned home with Soon in silence, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. Something had settled inside her, a quiet, unshakable awareness that whatever came next would not be survived by hesitation. The world she had been pushed into had revealed itself fully now, and there was no illusion left to hide behind. This was not a life she had chosen, but it was a life she now understood, and understanding changed everything. Morning came with movement, not chaos, not fear, but intention. Soon was already awake when Ayomide stepped into the main room. The phone calls began early, firmer than before, longer, less cautious. There was no more hiding, no more observing from the shadows. The time for waiting had ended. "They've started consolidating shares," one voice said through the phone. "I expected that," Soon replied. "They're trying to force a vote. They won't succeed." The certainty in his voice did not waver. Ayomide stood quietly nearby, listening not as an outsider anymore, but as someone who now understood what these words meant. This was not just about a company. It was about control, legacy, survival. When Sohn ended the call, he turned slightly toward her. "It's happening faster now," he said. Ayomide nodded. "I can feel that." There was no fear in her voice, only readiness. The board meeting was set for that afternoon. Not private, not hidden, public enough to matter. Soon would attend, and this time he would not go as the invisible man the world had ignored. Ayomide stood in the bedroom, staring at the clothes laid out before her. They were simple but chosen with care. A deep blue dress, structured yet modest, strong without being loud. She touched the fabric lightly. "This isn't about appearance," Soon said from the doorway. She glanced at him. "I know," she replied. A pause. "But it still matters." Soon nodded slightly. "Yes," he said, because presence in a world like this was its own form of power. The building that housed Balogun Holdings stood tall and deliberate against the skyline. Glass, steel, control. Ayomide stepped out of the car beside Soon, her posture steady, her breathing even. No one laughed this time. No whispers. Only recognition. And tension. The doors opened, and the moment they stepped inside, everything shifted. People turned. Conversations paused. Eyes followed, because the man they had believed absent, the man they had underestimated, had returned. The boardroom was already filled. Men and women seated around a long table, faces familiar to Soon. Allies, opponents, observers, and at the far end, Folarin Ajayi, waiting. Soun did not hesitate. He walked forward, Ayomide beside him. Not behind, not hidden, beside. Ajayi's eyes lifted. A small smile touched his lips. Right on time, he said. Soun took his seat. Ayomide remained standing for a moment, then sat beside him. The meeting began. Voices rose. Arguments formed. Numbers were presented. Strategies challenged. But beneath all of it, there was only one question. Who would control the future? Ajayi spoke first. Confident. Measured. The company needs direction, he said. Strong leadership. Stability. A few heads nodded. He leaned forward slightly. And that requires change. Soun remained still. Listening. Waiting. And who would lead that change, someone asked. Ajayi's answer came easily. I would. Silence followed. Not shocked, but tense. Then, Soun spoke. No. The word cut through the room. Simple. Final. Ajayi smiled faintly. You don't have the position to refuse, he said. Soun's voice did not rise. But I do, he replied. A folder was placed on the table. Different from Ajayi's. He slid it forward. Before you vote, Soun said you should see this. The room shifted. Curiosity. Tension. The documents were opened. And one by one, expressions changed. Evidence. Transactions. Hidden transfers. Connections. All leading back to Ajayi. The room erupted. Questions. Accusations. Shock. Ajayi's smile faded. Just slightly. You think this proves anything, he said. Soun leaned forward. It proves enough. The weight of the evidence settled. Irrefutably. Unavoidable. The balance had shifted. Completely. Votes were called. One by one. And the outcome became clear. Ajayi had lost. Silence fell. Heavy. Final. Ajayi stood slowly. His composure intact. But his position gone. This isn't over, he said quietly. Soun met his gaze. Yes, he replied. It is. Security stepped forward, and for the first time, Ajayi did not resist. He turned and walked out. The room exhaled, but Ayomide remained still, because she understood something no one else did. This was not just victory. This was closure. Later outside the building, the air felt different. Lighter. Clearer. Ayomide stood beside Soun, the city, stretching out before them. You didn't just protect yourself, she said. Soun shook his head slightly. No, he replied. You finished it. A pause. Then, yes. Ayomide looked at him, not as the man she had been forced to marry, not as the stranger she had once feared, but as someone she now chose to stand beside. I stayed, she said quietly. Soun turned slightly toward her. I know. Another pause. This time, she continued, it was my choice. Soun nodded. And for the first time, there was no distance between them. No uncertainty. No hidden truth. Only clarity. And something stronger than anything that had come before. Respect. The kind that cannot be forced. Cannot be given. Only earned. As the sun began to set over Lagos, casting long shadows across the city, Ayomide felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Peace. Not because everything had been easy, but because she had survived it. And more than that, she had chosen her place within it. No longer a burden, no longer a pawn, but a woman who had found her voice, and used it beside a man who had finally shown his truth, and stood in it. And together, they stepped forward, not into uncertainty, but into a future they would now define, on their own terms. Some stories begin with choice. This one did not. Ayomide's journey started in silence, in injustice, in a life where her voice did not matter. She was pushed, shaped, and discarded by people who believed her worth was tied to what she could give and how easily she could be controlled. But life has a way of revealing truth in unexpected places. Sometimes the very situation meant to break you becomes the place where you finally see clearly. Not everything that looks like loss is loss. And not everything hidden is meant to deceive sometimes. It is meant to protect, to prepare, to reveal who people truly are when everything else is stripped away. Ayomide did not find strength because she was given power. She found it because she chose not to run from truth, because she chose to stand, even when standing meant facing fear, betrayal, and uncertainty. And that is where real transformation begins, not when life becomes easier, but when you decide that your voice matters no matter how late it arrives. So now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Ayomide's place, would you have stayed or would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments, your perspective matters. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are many more stories like this, stories of resilience, justice, and unexpected transformation waiting for you. Because sometimes the most powerful journeys begin where you least expect them.